My daughter changed the locks while I was at the doctor. "This is my house now. You're too senile to live alone," she screamed. I left with one suitcase. 2 hours later, police knocked on her door because, "Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories." The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in my life. I had a routine cardiology appointment. Nothing serious, just the regular checkup that comes with being 68 years old. Dr. Morrison always ran late, so I'd brought my knitting and settled in for the usual 2-hour wait. I remember texting Sarah that I'd be home by noon. Maybe we could have lunch together since she'd been stopping by so often lately. She responded with a heart emoji, just a simple red heart that I now know meant goodbye. My name is Margaret Thompson, and for 42 years, I answered to Mrs. Thompson in classroom 237 at Jefferson Elementary School in Detroit. I taught third grade, that magical year when children still believe their teachers live at school, but are old enough to read chapter books. Over 4 decades, I watched nearly 2,000 8-year-olds grow from nervous first-day faces to confident fourth-grade bound students. Some of them now bring their own children to visit me, calling out, "Mrs. Thompson," at the grocery store like they're still 8 years old and amazed to see their teacher buying milk like a regular person. I married Robert straight out of college in 1978. We bought our 2-story colonial house on Maple Street that same year when Detroit still hummed with possibility and a teacher's salary could secure a mortgage. Robert worked at Ford, engineering parts I never quite understood, but always pretended to when he explained them over dinner. We painted every room ourselves that first summer, our hands covered in sunrise yellow for the kitchen and robin's egg blue for the nursery we were already planning. Sarah came first. Born during a January blizzard in 1981, the nurses said she was the loudest baby in the maternity ward, already demanding attention with powerful lungs that would later win her debate championships and apparently help her scream at her mother with conviction. Rebecca followed 3 years later, a quiet April baby who barely cried, content to watch the world with enormous brown eyes that missed nothing. I took exactly 6 weeks off for each birth before returning to classroom 237, pumping breast milk in the supply closet during recess and grading papers with a baby on my hip. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in their futures. When the district offered me a principal position, I turned it down because the hours would mean missing Sarah's volleyball games and Rebecca's violin recitals. When my mother developed Alzheimer's, I moved her into our guest room, teaching all day and caregiving all night, for 3 years until she passed. Robert never complained about the hospital bed in our dining room, or the way I sometimes fell asleep mid-sentence, exhausted from managing medications and lesson plans simultaneously. I spent summers teaching summer school, not for the love of July in a classroom without air conditioning, but for the extra money that went straight into college funds. Evenings meant tutoring struggling students at our kitchen table, while my own daughters did homework alongside them. Sarah would roll her eyes when I gave the neighbor's kid the same attention I gave her, but I thought I was teaching her generosity by example. Rebecca would help the younger children with basic math, already showing the patience that would make her an excellent nurse. Robert's cancer diagnosis came the year before he retired. Pancreatic stage 3. The kind where doctors use gentle voices and talk about quality of life instead of cure rates. I took early retirement to become his full-time caregiver, learning to manage IV lines and morphine doses, transforming our bedroom into a hospice suite. Sarah visited twice during those final 8 months. Rebecca moved back home to help, sleeping on the couch and taking night shifts so I could rest. When Robert died, holding my hand and apologizing for leaving me alone, Sarah arrived 2 hours after he passed, asking about life insurance policies before his body was even removed from our bed. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've lived alone in our house, finding peace in small routines. Morning coffee in Robert's favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle from when Rebecca knocked it off the counter at age 5. Tending the garden where his roses still bloom every spring, red and persistent like his love. reading to children at the library on Tuesdays, their wonder at picture books reminding me why I love teaching. The house is paid off, our life insurance settled, my teacher's pension sufficient for a comfortable life. I should have noticed when Sarah's visits increased, but her warmth didn't. My days had found a gentle rhythm in the 3 years since Robert passed, like a song played in a major key after months of funeral dirges. Every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, without an alarm clock, my eyes would open to the soft light filtering through the lace curtains Robert's mother had sewn for us as a wedding gift. I'd stretch my hand across to his side of the bed, still cool and smooth, and whisper, "Good morning, sweetheart," to the empty space that somehow still held his shape in my heart. The coffee maker, programmed the night before, would already be gurgling its familiar morning symphony. I'd pour that first cup into Robert's University of Michigan mug, the one with the faded block M and the chip on the handle, and carry it to the front porch, where the newspaper waited in its plastic sleeve. The Henderson boy who delivered it would always toss it perfectly onto the welcome mat, never in the bushes like his predecessor. I'd leave cookies. In our mailbox for him every Friday, chocolate chip or snickerdoodles, always in a Ziploc bag with a thank you note. The garden claimed my mornings after coffee and news. Robert and I had planted those roses the spring after Sarah was born. One bush for each year we hoped to spend together. 42 bushes now lined our property, some fuller than others, but all blooming in their season. The vegetable garden ran along the south side. Tomatoes and peppers and green beans climbing their carefully maintained trellises. Mr. Chen from next door would often peer over the fence, offering advice about my soil pH and accepting bags of surplus tomatoes with elaborate gratitude. Tuesdays belonged to the library, where I'd been volunteering in the children's section since retirement. Miss Amanda, the head librarian, who was barely older than my Rebecca, would have a stack of picture books waiting. From 10 to noon, I'd read to whoever showed up, sometimes a crowd of 20 preschoolers, sometimes just one shy toddler clinging to his mother's leg. I did all the voices, the gruff bears and squeaky mice, the wicked witches and brave princesses. The children would laugh when I roared like a dragon, their delight echoing off the library's high ceilings like music. Wednesdays meant grocery shopping at Kroger, where I'd worked my way through college stocking shelves. The manager, Tony, was the grandson of my shift supervisor from 1975. He'd always wave from his office window, and Ethel at the deli counter would slice my turkey just a hair thicker than standard, because she knew I liked it substantial for my sandwiches. I'd buy supplies for Sunday dinner, planning menus based on what Sarah's twins were currently willing to eat, their preferences changing as quickly as Michigan weather. The community center hosted my Thursday afternoon book club, 12 women between 60 and 85, reading everything from romance novels to presidential biographies. We'd been meeting for 15 years, our group surviving divorces, deaths, and that terrible year when Barbara insisted we read nothing but experimental poetry. We gossiped more than we discussed books, but loneliness has a way of creeping into empty houses, and those Thursday afternoons were fortification against its advance. Fridays I reserved for housework and baking. The vacuum would run over the same Persian rugs Robert's grandmother brought from Iran, their patterns still vibrant despite decades of foot traffic. I'd dust his collections, the model trains in the basement, the signed baseballs in his office, maintaining shrines to a life well lived. The kitchen would fill with the smell of rising bread or cooling cookies, extras always packaged for neighbors or the mailman or whoever stopped by. Sunday dinners were sacred, a tradition carried from my mother and grandmother before her. The dining room table, which could extend to seat 12, would be set with the good china by noon. Sarah would arrive by 4. With the twins, 8-year-old Madison and 10-year-old Mackenzie, their faces always buried in tablets until I enforced the no devices at Grandma's table rule. They'd complain, but eventually join me in the kitchen, stealing tastes of mashed potatoes and learning to fold napkins into flowers. Rebecca came when she could, her nursing schedule unpredictable, but her presence always warm. She'd bring wine and fresh flowers, helping me cook while sharing stories from the hospital that walked the line between hilarious and heartbreaking. Sarah would occasionally help, though more often she'd wander the house, opening drawers and studying contents with an interest she never showed in childhood. Evenings ended with phone calls to friends, checking on Dorothy recovering from hip surgery or planning lunch with Betty from church. By 9 o'clock, I'd be in bed with a book, reading until my eyes grew heavy, then placing my glasses on Robert's empty nightstand where his reading glasses still sat, waiting for an owner who would never return. This was my life, predictable and peaceful, a gentle descent toward whatever comes after, surrounded by love and memories and the assumption that tomorrow would unfold exactly like today. The changes started so gradually that I almost missed them, like watching paint fade on a wall you see every day. Sarah began appearing at odd hours, not the predictable Sunday dinner arrivals, but random Tuesday mornings or Thursday afternoons, always with an excuse that seemed reasonable in isolation but strange in accumulation. I was in the neighborhood, she'd say, though I knew her real estate office was 40 minutes away in Bloomfield Hills, nowhere near my modest Detroit neighborhood. The first time I found her in Robert's office, she jumped like a teenager caught smoking. She was holding his old filing cabinet open, her fingers walking through the labeled folders he'd meticulously maintained. "Just looking for baby pictures," she said, though the albums were clearly displayed on the bookshelf, had been there for 20 years. Her smile was too bright, her laugh too quick. She left without taking any photos, and I found myself checking that filing cabinet later, unable to shake the feeling that something had been disturbed, though nothing seemed missing. Jake started coming with her on these unscheduled visits, which was unusual since he typically avoided family gatherings beyond major holidays. He'd always been pleasant enough but distant, the kind of son-in-law who called me Mrs. Thompson even after 15 years of marriage to my daughter. Now he was suddenly interested in home maintenance, checking the furnace, examining the roof from the backyard, taking photos of the foundation for a friend who's a contractor. He carried a small notebook, jotting things down when he thought I wasn't looking. One afternoon, I came home from the library to find Sarah's car in my driveway. She had her own key, of course, for emergencies. But this wasn't an emergency. I found her in my bedroom with a measuring tape, stretching it across the windows. "Planning to redecorate," she said when I appeared in the doorway. "This room gets such beautiful light. You really should update these curtains, Mom. They're so dated." The curtains were 2 years old, custom made by Rebecca for my birthday. Sarah had complimented them at the time. The questions began innocuously enough. Over Sunday dinner, between passing the green beans and refilling water glasses, Sarah would ask about my finances. "Are you keeping track of all these expenses, Mom? Maybe I should help you set up online banking." When I assured her I'd been banking online for a decade, she pressed further. "But what about your investments? Dad's pension? Social Security? It's so complicated these days. You shouldn't have to worry about all that." My mail started disappearing. Not all of it, just certain pieces. The bank statement I always received on the 15th wasn't there. The pension check notice that came quarterly never arrived in spring. When I called the companies, they confirmed everything had been mailed on schedule. Sarah suggested I was probably just forgetting, picking up the mail and misplacing it. "It happens to everyone as they get older," she said, patting my hand with condescension disguised as concern. The locksmith's business card fell from her purse when she was looking for her phone, landing face up on my kitchen floor. "Secure Solutions, residential and commercial lock changes." My heart did a strange skip as I picked it up, handed it back. "Oh, that's nothing," she said, snatching it quickly. "Jake's office is upgrading their security. Can you believe someone tried to break in last month?" I couldn't, actually, since Jake worked in a high-security building with key card access, but I nodded and offered more coffee. Betty from book club mentioned seeing Sarah at Fifth Third Bank downtown, the main branch where I kept my accounts. "She was with some man in a suit," Betty said over our Thursday discussion of Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. "Very official looking." I waved, but she didn't see me. When I asked Sarah about it that Sunday, she looked confused. Downtown? No, I haven't been downtown in weeks. Betty must be mistaken. But Sarah's tell had always been the same since childhood, touching her ear when she lied, and her finger was there now, tucking imaginary loose hair. Mr. Chen mentioned Sarah had been by when I wasn't home, asking questions about the neighborhood. She wanted to know about property values, recent sales, if developers had been around. He told me over the fence as I watered my roses. I thought perhaps you were thinking of selling, moving to one of those nice senior communities. The thought had never crossed my mind. This house contained Robert's last breath, my daughter's first steps, 40 years of Christmas mornings and birthday parties, and quiet Sunday afternoons. That night, I stood in Robert's office and looked around with new eyes. Was the desk drawer slightly open? Had those files always been in that order? The spare house key we kept in the kitchen utility drawer was gone, though Sarah insisted she hadn't taken it when I asked. You probably just misplaced it, Mom. You know how things disappear. Yes, I was beginning to understand exactly how things disappear, carried away by familiar hands for unfamiliar purposes. I spent the next 3 weeks constructing elaborate explanations for every oddity, like a detective determined to prove a suspect's innocence rather than their guilt. The human mind has an extraordinary capacity to protect itself from painful truths, and mine was working overtime to preserve the image of the daughter I thought I'd raised. Each suspicious incident was rationalized, filed away under misunderstanding or coincidence, anything but what my gut was starting to whisper in the quiet hours before dawn. Sarah had always been the ambitious one, I reminded myself, while folding laundry on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Even as a child, she'd organized her stuffed animals by size and color, created detailed charts for her allowance savings, planned her entire life in neat bullet points by age 12. If she was measuring rooms and asking about finances, she was probably just being practical, thinking ahead. Maybe she wanted to help me reorganize, make the house more efficient for aging in place. That had to be it. She'd watched me care for my mother, seen how unprepared we'd been for the realities of decline. She was being proactive, not predatory. When Martha from next door mentioned seeing Sarah in my garden shed during my Tuesday library shift, I laughed it off with practiced ease. She's probably looking for the old tennis rackets, I said, though we donated all the sports equipment after Robert died. The twins are starting lessons. Martha looked doubtful but didn't press, and I spent that evening reorganizing the shed, pretending I wasn't checking if anything was missing. The only thing out of place was a box of old tax returns, moved from the back shelf to the front. Surely I'd done that myself and forgotten. The missing mail had such a simple explanation that I felt foolish for worrying. The Henderson boy had probably been delivering to the wrong house occasionally, teenage attention spans being what they were. The fact that only financial documents disappeared was just coincidence. I started having everything important sent electronically, proud of myself for solving the problem without confronting anyone, without acknowledging what I was really avoiding. When statements showed password reset attempts I hadn't made, I blamed hackers. Those mysterious criminals the news was always warning about. I baked Sarah's favorite lemon bars that Saturday, the ones with the shortbread crust that took 2 hours to make properly. While they cooled, I practiced conversations in my head, casual ways, to ask about her sudden interest in my affairs without sounding accusatory. But when she arrived with the twins, she was my Sarah again, helping Madison with her homework at the kitchen table, laughing at one of my stories about her father, complimenting the lemon bars with genuine appreciation. How could I suspect this woman who still had my eyes, my stubborn chin, my tendency to tap her foot when thinking? Jake's newfound interest in home maintenance was actually helpful, I told myself firmly. Men often developed hobbies as they aged, and property management was certainly more useful than golf. When he suggested I might want to update my will, given the tax law changes, it seemed like sound advice. You should use our family lawyer, he insisted. He specializes in estate planning. I already had a lawyer, Robert's friend from college who'd handled our affairs for 30 years. But I nodded politely and changed the subject to the twins' school play. The cognitive evaluation pamphlets I found in Sarah's purse, while looking for gum, were obviously related to her work. She dealt with elderly clients all the time in real estate, helping them transition to smaller homes or senior communities. The fact that several pages were dog-eared, certain symptoms highlighted in yellow, meant nothing. Sarah had always been a thorough researcher. The handwritten notes in the margins, forgetful about recent events, and confusion with finances were probably about a client. They couldn't be about me. I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't confused. When Rebecca called one evening, concerned because Sarah had been asking her questions about my mental state, I defended Sarah reflexively. "She's just worried about me living alone," I said, stirring soup I'd lost appetite for. "You know how she is, always planning ahead." Rebecca's silence spoke volumes, but I filled it with chatter about the garden, the library, anything but the growing evidence that something was terribly wrong. Rebecca offered to come for dinner that weekend, but I declined, not wanting her to see how I'd started hiding important papers, changing passwords, behaviors that would look paranoid to someone who didn't know what I knew, but couldn't admit. Sunday dinner that week was perfect, like a scene from a holiday movie. Sarah helped me cook. The twins set the table without being asked. Jake complimented my pot roast with apparent sincerity. We looked through photo albums, Sarah pointing out pictures from family vacations, remembering details I'd forgotten. "Remember when I caught that huge fish at Lake Michigan?" She laughed, pointing at her 10-year-old self holding a tiny bluegill. "You said it was definitely the biggest fish you'd ever seen." She hugged me goodbye that night, a real hug, not the quick, awkward embraces of recent months. Driving away, she waved from the car window like she used to as a child. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, convinced I'd imagined everything. That suspicion was just grief and loneliness playing tricks on an old woman's mind. The truth has a way of refusing to stay buried, like seeds that germinate in darkness and push through concrete seeking light. It was tax season, early April, when I opened my father's antique safe to retrieve the documents my accountant would need. The safe sat in Robert's office closet, hidden behind winter coats we'd never cleared out, its combination known only to Robert, myself, and Sarah, who I'd trusted with it when Robert was dying in case something happened to me during those exhausting months of caregiving. My fingers worked the familiar combination, Robert's birthday backwards, the lock clicking open with the same satisfying sound it had made for 40 years. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance. Our marriage certificate, birth certificates, social security cards in their worn envelope, the savings bonds Robert's mother left us. But the manila folder marked House Deed in Robert's precise handwriting was empty. Not missing, but empty, gaping like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. My hands shook as I searched through every document, checking if it had been misfiled. The deed we'd received in 2008, when we'd finally paid off our 30-year mortgage, the paper we'd celebrated with champagne and slow dancing in the kitchen, was gone. In its place was a sticky note in Sarah's handwriting. "Took to make copies for insurance update S." No date. No explanation of why copies couldn't be made without removing the original. No reason the original hadn't been returned. That afternoon, Fifth Third Bank called about unusual activity on my account. The young woman's voice was carefully professional, but I heard the concern underneath. "Mrs. Thompson, we've blocked a transaction attempting to add Sarah Mitchell as a joint account holder. The signature on the request doesn't match our records. Did you authorize this?" My mouth went dry as dust. I hadn't. The signature they described, submitted electronically through a mobile deposit, was dated 3 days prior when I'd been at my doctor's appointment, the one Sarah knew about because I'd texted her from the waiting room. "Could you email me the document?" I asked, my teacher's voice surprisingly steady. The image arrived within minutes. There was my name, signed with a shaky hand that looked nothing like my actual signature, but might fool someone who thought an elderly woman's penmanship had deteriorated. The witness signatures were Jake Mitchell and someone named Tom Mitchell, Jake's brother who I'd met once at a Christmas party 5 years ago. The request included power of attorney documents I'd never seen, giving Sarah complete control over my finances due to diminishing capacity of the account holder. I drove to the bank immediately, my hands gripping the steering wheel to stop their trembling. The manager, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd helped me after Robert died, sat with me and her office reviewing security footage. There was Sarah, clear as day, at the teller window with a stack of documents. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. last Tuesday, when I was reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar to a group of preschoolers 15 miles away. Sarah chatted with the teller, laughing, looking every inch the concerned daughter managing her elderly mother's affairs. That evening, I pulled Sarah's old room apart with systematic determination. Under the mattress of the guest bed, I found a folder that made my blood run cold. Practice signatures, my name written over and over in different styles, some matching the forgery at the bank. Printed emails between Sarah and Jake discussing the timeline and doctor's assessment. A business card for Sunshine Manor Assisted Living with notes on the back. Memory unit, 6K month, house sale should cover 2 years minimum. Real estate comparables from my neighborhood, with my house circled, and 450K quick sale, written in red ink. The worst was a draft letter dated 2 weeks in the future from Dr. Harrison, stating I'd been evaluated and found to have moderate dementia requiring immediate placement in a care facility. The letterhead looked official, but when I searched online, Dr. Harrison was real but specialized in sports medicine, not geriatrics. His signature on the letter was another forgery, practiced on the sheets beneath. There was a sticky note attached. Jake's friend from Jim owes him for legal help, will say whatever we need. I sat on the guest bed, surrounded by evidence of my daughter's betrayal, and felt something inside me break with an almost audible snap. This wasn't confusion or misunderstanding or overprotectiveness. This was a deliberate, calculated plan to steal my home, my freedom, my life. The daughter I'd sung to sleep, whose fever I'd monitored through endless nights, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts, and I love you to the moon written in purple marker, was planning to lock me away like an inconvenient piece of furniture. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands finally steady with purpose rather than age. Then I carefully returned each document to exactly where I'd found it, smoothing the mattress, adjusting the pillows, erasing any trace of my discovery. If Sarah wanted to play this game, she'd find her mother was still capable of strategic thinking. That night, I called Rebecca and asked her to come for lunch tomorrow, alone. I also called my old student, Marcus Williams, who'd become a detective with the Detroit police. "Mrs. Thompson," he said warmly, "what can I do for my favorite teacher?" "Marcus," I said, "I need to discuss something concerning elder fraud. Hypothetically speaking, of course." Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for April, the kind of spring day that usually filled me with hope. Instead, I watched from my kitchen window as 2 cars pulled into my driveway, Sarah's white Lexus and an unfamiliar black sedan. Sarah emerged first, checking her phone, then Jake, and finally a tall man in a navy suit carrying a medical bag. They walked toward my front door with the coordinated precision of soldiers executing a planned assault. I opened the door before they could knock, denying them even that small victory. "Mom!" Sarah's voice was syrup-sweet, theatrical. "This is Dr. Harrison. Remember I mentioned he specializes in geriatric evaluation? He just needs to ask you a few questions." The man extended his hand, and I saw the gym-calloused fingers, the sports medicine clinic logo on his bag that he tried to cover with his arm. This wasn't even the real Dr. Harrison, just someone Jake had convinced to play the part. "Please, come in," I said calmly, leading them to the living room where Robert's portrait watched from above the mantel. They arranged themselves strategically. Sarah beside me on the couch, too close, her hand on my arm like a shackle. Jake by the door, blocking the exit. The fake doctor across from us with his clipboard, already filled with observations he hadn't made. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, "can you tell me what day it is?" "It's Saturday, April 13th, 2024, I answered clearly. "It's also the day my daughter decided to betray me." The silence was electric. Sarah's grip tightened. "Mom's been confused lately," she said quickly. "She makes these accusations." "I found the documents under your old mattress," I interrupted. "The forged signatures, the practice sheets, the plan to put me in Sunshine Manor." I turned to the fake doctor. "How much did Jake promise you for this performance? Or are you just doing it because he helped with your DUI case last year?" The man's face drained of color. Jake stepped forward. "Margaret, you're clearly agitated. This paranoia is exactly why we're concerned." "Concerned about my house being worth $450,000 in a quick sale?" I pulled out my phone, showing the photos I'd taken. "Concerned about using my equity to cover the $200,000 you owe from failed business ventures?" Sarah's mask finally cracked, her sweet expression morphing into something ugly and desperate. "You don't understand, Mom. We're in trouble. We need this. You're just one person in this big house, and we have the twins to think about. Their college funds, their future built on locking their grandmother in a memory unit she doesn't need." "You're getting old," Sarah exploded, standing abruptly. "You're going to die anyway in a few years. Why should you get to sit on all this wealth while we're drowning? I'm your daughter. This should be mine. Dad would have wanted—" "Your father would be disgusted," I said quietly, and that stopped her cold. "Robert knew exactly who you were, Sarah. Why do you think he put everything in my name alone? Why do you think he made Rebecca the backup executor of our estate?" The fake doctor was already backing toward the door, mumbling about another appointment. Jake grabbed the medical bag, whispering furiously about sticking to the plan, but the man shook his head and practically ran to his car. Sarah watched her conspiracy crumble, her face cycling through rage, panic, and finally, cold calculation. "Fine," she hissed. "But I have a key. I have rights. This is my childhood home, and you can't keep me out." Rebecca's call came at midnight, waking me from restless half-sleep. Her voice was breathless, like she'd been running. "Mom, don't talk, just listen. I'm at my computer going through public records. Sarah and Jake filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago, but it was dismissed. They owe $200,000 to private lenders, the kind who don't accept payment plans. Jake's been gambling online, crypto trading, some investment scheme that collapsed. Mom, they're desperate." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "How do you know all this?" "Jake's ex-wife, Melissa, contacted me through Facebook. She's been trying to warn someone for years. Jake did this to his grandmother before we knew him. She died in a nursing home 8 months after he had her declared incompetent. The house sale barely covered his debts then. Melissa has documents, recordings, evidence from their divorce. She says there's more." The pieces clicked together like a horrible puzzle. Sarah's sudden interest in my finances wasn't recent. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Rebecca continued, her words tumbling fast. "I found the facility they plan to put you in. Sunshine Manor has 17 health code violations. They're under investigation for over-medication of residents. The owners give kickbacks to people who refer patients with good insurance or assets. Jake's brother Tom works there as an administrator. He would have controlled your medication, your visitors, everything." My stomach churned as Rebecca revealed more. "Sarah's been telling the neighbors you're declining. Mrs. Chen told me Sarah asked her to keep an eye on you and report any strange behavior. She's been building a case, creating witnesses. The mailman mentioned to me that Sarah asked him if you ever seemed confused when getting the mail. She told your book club friends you've been repeating stories, forgetting names." "But I haven't. I know, Mom, she's manufacturing symptoms. I called the library. Sarah went there last month, told them you might be showing up confused, possibly a danger to the children. She actually suggested they shouldn't let you read to kids unsupervised. Miss Amanda didn't believe her, thank God, but she documented the conversation. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope. Sarah had contacted my doctor's office, trying to access my medical records. She'd called my accountant, attempting to get power of attorney forms. She'd even reached out to my dentist, asking if I'd missed appointments, forgotten to pay bills, anything she could twist into evidence of incompetence. There's worse, Rebecca said quietly. Melissa found out Jake's lenders gave them until May 1st to pay at least half the debt. That's 2 weeks away. The house papers you found? They already have a buyer lined up, a developer who'll tear it down for condos. They promised him a quick sale below market value in exchange for cash up front. I thought of Robert's roses, the height marks on the kitchen door frame. 42 years of memories, scheduled for demolition. But worse was imagining myself in Sunshine Manor, over-medicated into compliance, while Sarah sold everything, told everyone I was too gone to notice or care. Mom, Melissa has evidence of what Jake did to his grandmother. She's willing to testify. We can stop this, but we need to act fast. They're escalating because they're running out of time. I know, I said, looking at Robert's photo on the nightstand. I've already started fighting back. After Rebecca's call, I couldn't go back to sleep. I wandered through my house like a ghost, touching walls that had heard Sarah's first words, running my fingers along the banister she'd slid down despite my warnings, standing in the doorway of her childhood room where I'd checked on her every night for 18 years, adjusting blankets, whispering prayers over her sleeping form. In the kitchen, I collapsed into a chair and finally let myself cry. Not the gentle tears of grief I'd shed for Robert, but raw, primal sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed. How did I fail so completely as a mother that my own daughter could plan my imprisonment with the casual efficiency of a grocery list? I remembered the emergency C-section when Sarah was born, how I'd refused general anesthesia because I wanted to be awake when she entered the world. The doctor said I was risking complications, but I didn't care. I needed to see her, to know she was safe. The first time they placed her on my chest, still bloody and screaming, I promised her everything. Every sacrifice would be worth it. Every dream I deferred would be reborn in her success. The photo albums mocked me from the living room shelf. Sarah at 5, missing her front teeth, holding a trophy from her first dance recital. I'd sewn that costume myself, spending 3 weeks hand-beating the tutu. Sarah at 10, winning the science fair with a project we'd worked on together every night for a month, even though I barely understood the chemistry involved. Sarah at 16, crying in my arms after her first heartbreak, letting me stroke her hair and promise that someday she'd find someone who deserved her. When had that little girl who wrote me poems for Mother's Day transformed into a woman who could practice forging my signature? When did the daughter who insisted on kissing my bruises better become someone who planned to inflict the ultimate wound? I pulled out the box of Mother's Day cards she'd made over the years, each one promising eternal love and gratitude. "You're the best mommy in the whole universe," written in green crayon. "Thank you for always believing in me," in middle school cursive. "I hope I can be half the mother you are," from when she was pregnant with Madison. Lies. All lies. Or maybe the truth that had curdled into something poisonous. The cruelest part was the memories that wouldn't stop playing, staying up all night when she had scarlet fever at 7, singing the same lullaby over and over because it was the only thing that calmed her. Selling my grandmother's pearl necklace to pay for her wedding dress because she'd fallen in love with one beyond our budget. Taking out a second mortgage without telling Robert when her first business failed, protecting her pride while shouldering the debt. I found myself on the floor of Robert's office, holding his cardigan, sobbing into the wool that still smelled faintly of his cologne. "I'm sorry," I whispered to his photograph. "I'm so sorry. You trusted me to raise her right, and I failed. I loved her too much, or not enough, or in all the wrong ways." The twins. My God, the twins. What were they learning from this? That grandmother is disposable? That love is conditional on property values? Madison had Sarah's eyes, but Rebecca's gentle spirit. Mackenzie had my stubborn streak and Robert's sense of humor. Would I become a cautionary tale they'd whisper about in therapy someday? The grandmother who disappeared into a facility while Mommy renovated her house. At 3 in the morning, something shifted inside me like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. I was sitting on Robert's office floor, still clutching his cardigan, when I heard his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Not literally. I wasn't having a breakdown, but that internal voice that carried his tone, his inflection, his unshakable faith in my strength. Margaret Ann Thompson, you didn't survive 40 years of Detroit public schools to be taken down by a spoiled daughter with a gambling husband and a forged signature. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, and walked to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked defeated, eyes swollen, face blotchy from crying. But behind the tears, I saw something else. The same steel that had organized district-wide teacher strikes, that had fought insurance companies for Robert's cancer treatment, that had raised 2 daughters alone while he traveled for work. I wasn't just a victim. I was a survivor who'd temporarily forgotten her own strength. I splashed cold water on my face, made a pot of coffee in Robert's mug, and opened my laptop. By sunrise, I'd created a war room on my dining table. Color-coded folders, timeline spreadsheets, evidence logs. The teacher in me had awakened, and she was magnificent in her methodical fury. "You didn't raise a fool," I told Robert's photograph, propping it up where he could oversee my work. "You raised a fighter who taught 8th graders algebra when everyone said they couldn't learn. Sarah might have forgotten who I am, but I haven't." I called Marcus Williams, my former student turned detective, at exactly 7 a.m. "Mrs. Thompson," he answered warmly, "our hypothetical conversation yesterday." I'm guessing it's not so hypothetical? "No, Marcus. My daughter is trying to have me declared incompetent to steal my house. I need your help." "I'm on my way." Next, I called Rebecca. "Honey, I need you to contact Jake's ex-wife. Tell her I want everything she has. I'm done crying. Now I'm fighting." Then I did something that would have seemed impossible 12 hours earlier. I called Sarah's childhood best friend, Jennifer, now a family law attorney in Chicago. "Jenny, it's Mrs. Thompson. I need to ask you something difficult. You knew Sarah better than anyone. Was she always capable of this?" Jennifer's silence spoke volumes before her words. "Mrs. T, I loved Sarah, but she always had a coldness when she didn't get what she wanted. Remember when she didn't make varsity volleyball? She got the girl who did make it expelled by planting drugs in her locker. She told me about it years later like it was funny. I'm so sorry this is happening to you." The final call was to my attorney, Robert's college roommate, David. "Margaret, I've been expecting this call. Sarah came to me last month wanting to review your will. When I refused, she threatened to have me removed as your attorney for taking advantage of an elderly client. I've been documenting everything." By noon, my dining room looked like a command center. Marcus had brought recording equipment and legal forms. Rebecca arrived with 3 boxes of evidence from Jake's ex-wife. David came with 2 paralegals and a court stenographer. Jennifer connected via video call, offering pro bono assistance despite Sarah being her former friend. "They want to fight," I announced to my assembled team. "They're about to learn what happens when you corner a Detroit public school teacher who's got nothing left to lose but everything to protect." The plan came together with the precision of a military operation. Marcus showed me how to legally install hidden cameras in my own home. Tiny devices that look like smoke detector components and air freshener plugins. "Michigan's a one-party consent state," he explained, mounting a camera with a clear view of the front door. "You can record any conversation you're part of, and anyone who enters your home without permission." Within 2 days, we had 6 cameras covering every entrance and main room. I practiced looking confused and vulnerable in the mirror, perfecting the slight hand tremor and distant gaze that Sarah expected to see. Oscar-worthy, Rebecca said, watching me rehearse shuffling to the door with deliberately slow movements. David worked legal magic with the house deed, creating an irrevocable trust backdated to January before Sarah's scheme began. The beauty is, it's completely legitimate, he explained. You had every right to protect your assets. The house is now held in trust for Rebecca and your granddaughters, with you as lifetime resident. Sarah can't touch it, even if she somehow got conservatorship. I opened new bank accounts at a credit union across town, transferring funds in small amounts to avoid attention. My pension and Social Security were rerouted to these accounts, ones Sarah didn't know existed. David helped me assign Rebecca as my medical power of attorney and healthcare proxy through documents filed with the state, superseding anything Sarah might forge. The neurologist appointment was Marcus's idea. Dr. Patel, the state's leading expert in cognitive evaluation, put me through 3 hours of testing. "Mrs. Thompson, you have the cognitive function of someone 20 years younger," she said, providing detailed documentation. "I'll testify to this in court if needed." She also noted my awareness of potential exploitation, adding it to my medical record as evidence of sound judgment. Jake's ex-wife, Melissa, was a goldmine of information. She provided recordings from their divorce proceedings, where Jake bragged about handling his grandmother, documents showing the house sale that funded his law school loans, and most damning, a death certificate showing his grandmother died just 8 months after being placed in a facility from over-medication complications. The master stroke was my performance for Sarah. I began leaving cabinets slightly open, misplacing my reading glasses in obvious places, asking her the same question twice during phone calls. Not enough to seem sudden or theatrical, just subtle signs of the decline she wanted to see. Sarah took the bait completely, her visits increasing as she documented every incident with barely concealed glee. "Mom seems confused about her medications," she told Rebecca, not knowing Rebecca was recording. "I found her pills all mixed up." What Sarah didn't know was that I deliberately put vitamins in the prescription bottle, keeping my actual medications locked in a safe. I let Sarah find me crying over Robert's photo one afternoon, mumbling about seeing him in the garden. She practically glowed with excitement, immediately calling Jake to report this hallucination. The cameras captured her taking photos of me without permission, whispering into her phone about rapid deterioration. Meanwhile, I was building my counter case. Every forged document was analyzed by a handwriting expert David hired. Every lie Sarah told the neighbors was documented through witness statements. Marcus discovered Sarah had been shopping for elderly housing facilities for months, putting deposits down at 3 different places, all owned by the same company that employed Jake's brother. "She's planning to move fast once she has control," Marcus warned, "but she won't get the chance. We're ready." Sarah scheduled her final move for Sunday, April 28th, calling it a family intervention with the cold efficiency of a general planning an invasion. She'd spent the week poisoning the community well, visiting every neighbor with tears in her eyes and stories of my rapid decline. She told Mrs. Chen she'd found me talking to Robert in the garden at midnight. She informed the Hendersons I'd been leaving the stove on, though I hadn't cooked all week, deliberately eating cold sandwiches to avoid giving her any ammunition. The invitation list was strategic and cruel. Sarah invited my sister from Florida, who hadn't visited in 2 years and would believe whatever she was told. Robert's brother Tom, who'd always resented that Robert inherited their mother's house. 3 couples from church who'd noticed I'd missed services recently, not knowing it was because I was meeting with lawyers and building my defense. Even Dorothy from book club, still recovering from hip surgery and dependent on others for transportation, ensuring she'd feel obligated to support whoever helped her attend. Sarah's emails, which Marcus helped me legally access from her cloud storage, revealed the choreography of destruction. The facility van was scheduled for 4 p.m., giving her exactly 1 hour to get me packed and out. Jake's brother would be driving, already authorized to admit me under the pre-signed papers. A cleaning crew was booked for Monday morning, followed by an estate sale company Tuesday. The developer who wanted to tear down my house for condos had a cashier's check ready, contingent on vacant possession by May 1st. Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house touching everything, memorizing textures in case Sarah succeeded despite our preparations. The kitchen table where Madison had finally admitted she was being bullied at school, trusting me when she couldn't trust her parents. The window seat where Mackenzie practiced violin, terrible at first but improving with encouragement Sarah never gave. The pantry Robert built with his own hands, every shelf still level after 35 years. I found Sarah's baby book and almost weakened. Her first word hadn't been mama or dada, but more, perfectly capturing her personality even at 10 months old. I'd written in the margins, Sarah knows what she wants and asks for it, she'll go far in life. I hadn't imagined how far she'd go or who she'd be willing to step on to get there. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, pathetic fallacy at its finest. I dressed carefully in my navy dress, the one Robert always said made me look like a judge. Hidden underneath was a recording device Marcus had given me, backup for the house cameras. I put on my pearl earrings, the ones Sarah had always admired, and my wedding ring, which I'd stopped wearing after Robert died, but needed today as armor. By 2 p.m., cars began filling my driveway and street. Sarah arrived first with Jake and the twins, who looked uncomfortable and confused. "Why are all these people coming to Grandma's?" Madison asked. "Shut up and go watch TV," Sarah snapped, her mask already slipping. The girls fled to the living room, and I saw Mackenzie glance back at me with worried eyes. My sister Helen wheeled Dorothy in, both looking concerned but supportive of Sarah, who'd met them at the door with tissues and tragic expressions. "It's been so hard," I heard her say. "She's not the same person anymore. Yesterday, she didn't even recognize the twins." A complete lie. I'd helped Madison with math homework via FaceTime just yesterday. But who would believe the senile old woman? The neighbors gathered on their lawns despite the drizzle, drawn by the spectacle of multiple cars and Sarah's dramatic preparations. She'd even called the local news about the heartbreak of dementia, hoping for coverage of her brave decision to get her mother help. The young reporter looked bored until she saw the facility van pull up 3 houses down, waiting for its cue like a hearse anticipating death. Jake positioned himself by the door while his brother Tom entered with medical scrubs under his jacket, ready to play the concerned healthcare worker. Sarah had a folder thick with her evidence. The forged medical evaluation, the false witness statements, the photographs she'd taken without permission, showing me confused and disoriented. "Mom," Sarah said loudly, ensuring everyone heard her concerned tone. "We need to talk about your future. Everyone here loves you and wants what's best for you." She pulled out power of attorney papers, the final signature line highlighted in yellow. "You just need to sign this so I can take care of everything. You won't have to worry anymore." The pen she offered was Robert's Mont Blanc, the one he'd used to sign our mortgage papers, our daughter's birth certificates, his will. Using it for this betrayal was a calculated cruelty that nearly broke my composure. Around me, sympathetic faces nodded encouragement, believing they were witnessing a necessary mercy instead of an attempted murder of my autonomy. I picked up the pen, feeling its familiar weight, and Sarah's smile widened with premature victory. I held Robert's Mont Blanc pen for a long moment, watching Sarah's eager face, then set it down gently on the coffee table. "I'm not signing anything, Sarah." My voice was clear, strong, carrying the authority of 40 years in a classroom. "In fact, I believe you have some explaining to do." Sarah's face flickered through confusion to rage. "Mom, you're confused. Just sign the papers. Everyone here can see you need help." "The only help I need is from law enforcement." I stood up straighter, dropping the confused elderly act entirely, which is why I called them 2 hours ago. Right on cue, 2 police cars pulled into my driveway, followed by a van marked Adult Protective Services. Detective Marcus Williams entered first, his badge visible, his presence commanding immediate attention. Behind him came two uniformed officers and a social worker I'd been working with named Janet Chen. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus addressed Sarah formally, "we need to discuss several forged documents submitted to financial institutions in your mother's name." Sarah's carefully constructed composure shattered. "This is ridiculous. She's senile. Tell them, Dr. Harrison." She looked around frantically for the fake doctor, who was notably absent. "Jake, where's— Dr. Harrison isn't coming," I announced, "especially since the real Dr. Harrison is at a medical conference in Boston today. I know because I called him yesterday. He's quite interested in whoever impersonated him to write false medical evaluations." The room erupted in confused murmurs. I pulled out my phone, connected it to my smart TV, and played the first recording. Sarah's voice filled the room, captured by my hidden cameras. "The old bat won't know what hit her. Once she's in the facility, Tom will make sure she's medicated enough to never contest anything." The gathered crowd gasped. Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth. My sister Helen stood up, moving away from Sarah like she was contagious. "There's more," I said, playing the next clip. Jake and Tom discussing drug dosages, laughing about how his grandmother went quietly after the third day of Haldol. Then Sarah practicing my signature, saying, "Almost. Got it. Good enough for banks anyway." Marcus stepped forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're under arrest for elder abuse, attempted fraud, and forgery." As he read Sarah her rights, I turned to address the room. These people she'd gathered to witness my humiliation. "My daughter has been planning to steal my house for 6 months. She owes dangerous people $200,000 and planned to sell my home to a developer." I gestured to the window where the facility van still waited. That van was meant to take me to Sunshine Manor, a facility under investigation for over-medication deaths, where Jake's brother Tom works as an administrator. Jake tried to bolt for the door, but found 2 officers blocking his path. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said, "we have a warrant for your arrest as well. Your ex-wife has been very helpful with information about your grandmother's suspicious death." "What?" Sarah shrieked. "Melissa? That brave woman," I corrected, "who tried to warn people for years." The social worker, Janet Chen, stepped forward. "I've been investigating this case for 3 weeks. Mrs. Thompson scored in the 99th percentile on cognitive evaluations. She's more mentally acute than most 40-year-olds. Every document suggesting otherwise was fabricated." The young reporter, who'd been filming everything, pushed forward with her microphone. "Mrs. Thompson, how did you discover your daughter's plan?" "She made one mistake," I said, looking directly at Sarah. "She forgot that I spent 40 years teaching children, including recognizing when someone was forging hall passes. I know fake signatures when I see them." Tom tried to slip out the back door but found Rebecca there with Jake's ex-wife, Melissa, and 2 more officers. Melissa waved at Jake. "Hi, honey. Remember how you said I'd never prove what you did to your grandmother? I've been recording our conversations for 5 years. Every threat, every admission, every boast about your perfect schemes." Sarah turned to the gathered guests, tears streaming down her face. Real ones this time. "She's my mother. The house should be mine. I'm drowning in debt because of Jake, and she has all this money just sitting here." "And there it is," I said quietly. "The truth. It was never about my well-being. It was about money." The twins appeared in the doorway, Madison crying, Mackenzie's face stone cold like her father's. "Grandma," Madison whispered, "are they taking Mommy away?" Before I could answer, Sarah lunged at me, screaming obscenities. The officers immediately restrained her, having to carry her to the police car as she alternated between threats and sobs. Jake was led away in separate car, still trying to claim this was all a misunderstanding. As the police cars pulled away, I heard Sarah's final words through the window. "You'll die alone, old woman. Alone." I looked around my living room at Rebecca, hugging the twins, at neighbors who'd rushed to apologize for believing Sarah's lies, at my sister, holding my hand with tears of remorse. at Marcus nodding respectfully from the doorway. "No," I said softly. "I won't." The aftermath of Sarah's arrest unfolded like a Shakespeare tragedy's final act, each revelation more damning than the last. The investigation revealed that Jake had been planning similar schemes with 3 other elderly clients through his law practice. His grandmother's death was reopened as a criminal case when toxicology reports showed lethal levels of antipsychotics in her system at the time of death. Tom was arrested at Sunshine Manor, where investigators discovered 17 other suspicious deaths over 3 years, all involving residents whose estates were quickly liquidated. Sarah's trial became local news. The teacher's daughter who tried to steal her mother's life. She was sentenced to 5 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy, with no possibility of early release. Jake received 12 years, his previous sealed cases finally catching up with him. Tom plea bargained for 8 years in exchange for testifying about the facility's systematic murder of residents for profit. The owners of Sunshine Manor faced federal charges, their entire chain of facilities shut down, hundreds of families finally getting answers about their loved ones' sudden declines. I attended every day of Sarah's trial, sitting in the front row where she could see me. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to know I was still her mother, even if she'd forgotten how to be my daughter. When the verdict was read, she looked at me with eyes that held no remorse, only rage at being caught. That was the moment I finally accepted that the daughter I'd raised existed only in photographs and memories, that this stranger wearing Sarah's face was someone I'd never truly known. The twins' paternal grandparents, the Kowalskis, stepped forward to take custody. They were good people who'd been estranged from Jake after he'd stolen from them years earlier. Madison and Mackenzie visited me every Wednesday after school, their grandmother Mary dropping them off with apologetic smiles. "They need you," she said simply. "You're the only stable thing in their chaos." Madison struggled initially, loyal to her mother despite everything, writing letters to Sarah in prison that came back unopened. But slowly, making cookies together and reading stories like we used to, she began to heal. "Grandma Margaret," she said one afternoon, "Mom was wrong, wasn't she, about you being sick?" "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes people we love make terrible choices." "Will I make terrible choices too?" Her fear was palpable. "You get to choose who you become," I told her. "Every day you choose." Mackenzie, older and more perceptive, threw herself into violin practice with fierce determination. "I'm going to earn my own money," she declared. "I'll never need anything from anyone." I taught her about balance, about accepting help versus expecting rescue, lessons her parents never learned. Rebecca moved into the neighborhood, buying a small house 3 blocks away with her husband Paul. Sunday dinners resumed, now with Rebecca's family, the twins, and often the Kowalskis. My dining room table, which Sarah had planned to sell to strangers, became the center of a reconstructed family, one built on choice rather than just blood. I transformed my experience into purpose, working with Adult Protective Services to create educational programs about elder abuse. My story, with Marcus's help, became a training video for law enforcement. I testified before the state legislature about strengthening elder protection laws, my teacher's voice carrying weight in those marble halls. The Thompson Law, requiring multiple independent medical evaluations before conservatorship, passed unanimously. The house Sarah tried to steal became a gathering place for elderly people learning to protect themselves. Every Thursday, my living room filled with seniors learning about financial safety, document security, and recognizing manipulation. Betty from book club became my co-facilitator after her own nephew tried something similar. "You saved me," she said. "Your story saved dozens of us." The developer who'd planned to tear down my house for condos sent an apology letter and a donation to the elder advocacy group I'd started. The money funded legal services for seniors who couldn't afford protection. David, my attorney, volunteered his time, saying fighting alongside me had reminded him why he became a lawyer. A year later, I received a letter from Sarah in prison. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a request for money for commissary items. I sent the letter back with a note. I love you, but I cannot enable you. When you're ready to be accountable, I'll be here. She never wrote again. 2 years later, at Madison's middle school graduation, she thanked me in her speech. My grandma Margaret taught me that strength isn't about taking from others, but standing firm in truth. She showed me that love means accountability, not enabling. Mackenzie, now in high school, had won a full violin scholarship to Interlaken, her talent blooming without her parents' toxic presence. My garden grew fuller each year, Robert's roses joined by new plants, the twins and I selected together. The height marks on the kitchen door frame gained new additions as the girls grew taller, stronger, kinder than their parents. The house that almost became my prison became instead a fortress of second chances, where broken families learn to rebuild and elderly voices learn to roar. I still drink coffee from Robert's mug each morning, but now I smile at his photo, knowing I'd kept my promise to be strong. 5 years have passed since that April Sunday, when my daughter tried to erase me from my own life. I'm 73 now, still living in the house on Maple Street, still tending Robert's roses that bloom more magnificently each spring, as if he's sending me strength through their roots. This morning, I sat on my porch with that chipped University of Michigan mug, watching Madison help me plant new lavender bushes along the walkway. She's 18 now, headed to Michigan State on a full academic scholarship, planning to become a social worker specializing in elder advocacy. "Grandma Margaret," she said, dirt under her fingernails, smile bright in the morning sun. "I've been thinking about forgiveness lately." "Oh?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart clenched. "I got a letter from Mom. First one she's ever sent me. She wants me to visit before she gets out next year." I set down my coffee carefully. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Mackenzie says I shouldn't go, that Mom will just manipulate me. But I keep thinking about what you taught me, that accountability and love can exist together. Maybe she's finally ready to be accountable?" This is the complexity of real life, isn't it? It's not a movie where the villain disappears forever and the heroes live in uncomplicated happiness. Sarah will be released next year, will walk the same streets, shop in the same stores. She'll always be my daughter, the twins' mother, a permanent character in our story even when she's absent from our daily pages. "Whatever you decide," I told Madison, "I'll support you. But remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and reconciliation requires both people to do the work." This house that Sarah tried to steal has become something beautiful she never imagined, a sanctuary for those society often discards. Every Thursday, my living room fills with silver-haired warriors learning to protect themselves. Last month, we helped Mrs. Patterson discover her son was slowly draining her accounts. The month before, we caught a romance scammer targeting Mr. Williams, a lonely widower 3 streets over. We've become an army of the elderly, armed with knowledge and righteous fury, refusing to be dismissed as senile or disposable. Rebecca comes for dinner every Sunday, bringing her 2 young children who call me Grandma Cookie, because I always have fresh-baked snickerdoodles waiting. She's head of nursing now at Detroit General, implementing protocols to identify elder abuse victims who come through the ER. She says Sarah inadvertently gave us both our life's mission, protecting those who protected us first. The Kowalskis and I have become unlikely friends, bonded by our shared commitment to the twins. Mary often says, "Those girls are who they are because of you. You showed them that genetics isn't destiny." Jake sends them letters from prison they don't open, each one filed away by their grandparents' lawyer in case restraining orders are needed when he's released in 7 years. But here's what I've learned. What I need you to understand. The people who are supposed to love us most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us deepest. It's not because we failed them or because we deserve betrayal. Sometimes people are broken in ways our love cannot fix. Sarah wasn't corrupted by Jake. She chose him because he matched something already within her. Those Mother's Day cards proclaiming eternal love weren't lies. They were the truth of a moment that couldn't sustain itself against greed. The moral isn't simple, but it's essential. Love your children, but don't lose yourself in them. Sacrifice for your family, but maintain boundaries that protect your dignity. Trust, but verify. Forgive when possible, but never at the cost of your safety. And remember, you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if that someone is your own child. Growing old in America often means becoming invisible, dismissed, warehoused. We're seen as burdens rather than libraries of wisdom, obstacles to inheritance rather than humans deserving respect. Sarah saw me as a problem to be solved, a bank account to be accessed, square footage to be liquidated. She forgot I was a person who had survived 70 years of life, who had faced down angry parents, budget cuts, cancer, and widowhood. She forgot that teachers are fighters by nature. We battle ignorance every day, and we don't retire from that fight just because we leave the classroom. Your story might be different. Maybe it's a nephew eyeing your savings, a caregiver isolating you from friends, or just the slow erosion of respect that comes with gray hair and wrinkled hands. But you have power, you have rights, you have value beyond any bank account or property deed. So I ask you, what would you do if someone you loved tried to erase you? Would you recognize the warning signs I almost missed? Would you fight back or fold under the weight of betrayal? Have you protected yourself legally, financially, emotionally from those who might see your vulnerability as opportunity? Share your thoughts below, but more importantly, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. That quiet neighbor who seems isolated, the aunt whose children visit only when they need money, the friend who's mentioned feeling pressured to sign just a few papers. Sometimes one story of survival can spark another person's resistance. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, because every one of us has a battle worth fighting and a life worth protecting. Remember, you are not too old to matter. You are not too frail to fight. You are not alone, even when those who should stand beside you choose to stand against you. The sun still rises, roses still bloom, and somewhere, a grandmother is teaching her granddaughter that strength runs deeper than blood.